The dust cloud on the horizon had long since vanished when Sarah Vance finally admitted to herself that no one was coming back. She stood in the middle of the empty prairie, her dark hair whipping around her face in the hot August wind of 1872, staring at the wheel tracks that stretched westward like twin scars across the Montana grasslands. 3 days ago, the wagon train had left her behind after cholera swept through the camp, and though she had survived the fever, they had assumed she was already dead when they pulled out in the darkness before dawn. Her father had died first, then her mother just hours later, and Sarah herself had collapsed into delirium while the other families burned what remained of their belongings. When she woke, shivering despite the summer heat, she found herself alone except for the graves hastily marked with crossed sticks and the few supplies someone had left near where she lay. A canteen of water, some hardtack, a blanket, not enough to survive more than a few days in this wilderness. Sarah was 20 years old and had never been alone in her life. She had grown up in Philadelphia, where streets teemed with people, and you could hear your neighbors through thin boarding house walls. The journey west had been her father's dream, a fresh start in Oregon where land was cheap and opportunities endless. Now he was dead, her mother was dead, and she was stranded in a landscape so vast and empty it made her chest ache with a loneliness that felt like drowning. She sat down on the hard earth and tried to think. The wagon train was headed toward Fort Benton, still weeks away. Behind her, the last town they had passed was a tiny settlement called Malad City in Idaho Territory, at least 100 miles back by her reckoning. She had no horse, no real supplies, and no idea how to survive out here. The sun beat down mercilessly, turning the world into shimmering waves of heat. She should probably start walking, but in which direction? Forward seemed hopeless, backward seemed impossible, and staying here meant certain death. The sound of hoofbeats made her scramble to her feet, her heart hammering with sudden hope and fear in equal measure. A rider was approaching from the south, moving at an easy lope across the grassland. Sarah's hand went instinctively to her throat, where her mother's locket still hung on its thin chain. She had heard enough stories about what could happen to a woman alone in this country. Raiders, outlaws, hostile tribes. But she had no weapon, no way to defend herself, and nowhere to hide in this flat expanse. The rider drew closer, and Sarah could make out more details. A tall man on a bay horse, wearing a weathered brown hat and dusty trail clothes. He sat his saddle like someone who had been born on horseback, moving with the animal's rhythm as naturally as breathing. When he was still 50 yards away, he raised one hand in a gesture that seemed more cautious than threatening. Sarah stood her ground because she had no other choice. Her legs trembled beneath her skirts, and she wondered if she might collapse again. The fever had left her weak, and she had eaten nothing but a few pieces of hardtack in 3 days. The cowboy reined in his horse about 10 feet away and studied her with eyes the color of storm clouds. He was younger than she had first thought, maybe 25 or 26, with sun-darkened skin and dark hair that needed cutting. His face was lean and strong-featured, marked by sun and wind and hard living. He looked at the crossed sticks marking her parents' graves, then at her makeshift camp, then back at her pale face. "You're not alone," he said quietly. His voice was low and rough, but something in his tone made Sarah's throat tighten with unexpected emotion. Those 3 words, so simple, but they meant everything in that moment. "The wagon train," she started to explain, but her voice cracked. "There was cholera. They thought I was dead. When I woke up, they were gone." The cowboy swung down from his horse with easy grace. Up close, Sarah could see the dust caked on his clothes, the worn patches on his denim trousers, the way his hand rested naturally on the gun at his hip. But his eyes were kind, and when he looked at her, she did not see threat or calculation. She saw concern. "Name's Nathan Garrison," he said. "I've been trailing a couple of strays from my herd, but that can wait." "How long since they left you?" "3 days," Sarah whispered. "My parents died. I was sick too, but I survived." Nathan glanced at the sun, then back at her. "You got any water left?" She shook her head. The canteen had run dry that morning. Without a word, he unhitched his own canteen and handed it to her. Sarah drank gratefully, trying not to gulp, trying to maintain some dignity even in these desperate circumstances. The water was warm but tasted like salvation. "I'm Sarah Vance," she managed. "From Philadelphia originally. We were heading to Oregon." Nathan studied the wheel tracks heading west. "That train's too far ahead to catch now, even if we started right away. Nearest town is back in Idaho Territory, place called Mallet City. It's not much, but there's people there and a stage that comes through twice a month heading to Boise. I can get you there." Sarah felt tears prick her eyes, but she blinked them back. She had cried enough in the past 3 days to last a lifetime. "I don't have money to pay you." "Didn't ask for payment," Nathan said simply. He looked at her parents' graves again. "You want to say any words before we go, or leave a better marker?" The kindness in the question nearly broke her composure entirely. Sarah nodded, not trusting her voice. Nathan found some flat rocks and arranged them over the graves while she stood with her head bowed, saying a silent goodbye to the parents who had loved her enough to risk everything for a better life, only to find death in this harsh land instead. When she was ready, Nathan helped her up onto his horse. She had never ridden before except in a wagon, and the height was terrifying. But Nathan swung up behind her, his arms coming around to hold the reins, and somehow she felt safer than she had in days. He smelled like leather and horses and wood smoke, and the solid warmth of him at her back was reassuring in a way she could not quite explain. They rode south through the afternoon heat, moving at a steady pace that ate up the miles without exhausting the horse. Nathan did not talk much, but occasionally he would point out landmarks or explain features of the terrain. A line of cottonwoods marking a creek, the distant purple shapes of mountains, the way certain grasses grew only where water ran underground. Sarah's mind drifted as they rode. She thought about Philadelphia, about the life she had left behind. She had worked in a textile mill before her father announced they were going west, standing at a loom 14 hours a day in air thick with cotton dust. It had not been a good life, but it had been predictable, safe. Now nothing was predictable, and safety seemed like something from another world entirely. "You got family back east?" Nathan asked as the sun began sinking toward the horizon. "An aunt in Baltimore," Sarah said, "but we were not close. My parents were all I had." Nathan was quiet for a moment. "I'm sorry, cholera's a hard way to go. Did you lose someone to it?" Sarah asked, hearing something in his voice. "My mother when I was 14, out in Texas where I grew up. She died in 2 days and there was nothing anyone could do." He paused. "My father died a year later in a riding accident. After that, I headed north and started working cattle, been doing it ever since." Sarah turned her head slightly, trying to see his face. "So you are alone too?" "Mostly," Nathan admitted. "Got some friends scattered around. A few ranchers I work for regular, but no family, no ties. It's easier that way out here." They made camp that night beside a small stream where Nathan's horse could drink and graze. He built a fire with practiced efficiency and produced beans and salt pork from his saddlebags that tasted better than anything Sarah had eaten in weeks. She had not realized how hungry she was until food was in front of her. "Eat slow," Nathan cautioned. "You have been sick. Don't want to overwhelm your stomach." Sarah obeyed, taking small bites and savoring each one. Across the fire, Nathan watched her with those steady gray eyes. She wondered what he saw when he looked at her. A burden, probably. A complication in his otherwise solitary life. But he had not hesitated to help her, had not asked for anything in return, and that kind of simple decency was rare enough that it made her chest ache with gratitude. "Why did you help me?" she asked quietly. "You could have ridden past." Nathan poked at the fire with a stick, sending sparks spiraling into the darkening sky. "Couldn't do that. No one should die alone out here just because some wagon train panicked and left them behind. It is not right." "Most people would not care about right," Sarah said. "Most people only care about themselves." "Maybe," Nathan allowed. "But I figure if we do not look out for each other, what is the point of any of it? This country's hard enough without making it harder." They sat in comfortable silence after that, listening to the fire crackle and the creek burble over stones. Sarah wrapped herself in the blanket Nathan had given her and lay down on the hard ground. She had thought she would not be able to sleep, would lie awake fearing every sound in the darkness. But somehow, with Nathan on watch across the fire, she felt safe enough to close her eyes. When she woke once in the middle of the night, she saw him still sitting there, silhouetted against the stars, keeping guard. She went back to sleep feeling something close to peace. They reached Malad City 3 days later. It was a small settlement clustered around a dusty main street, with a general store, a saloon, a boarding house, and a handful of rough wooden buildings that served various purposes. Mountains rose in the distance, their peaks still touched with snow even in late summer. The town sat in a valley where streams ran down from higher elevations, making the land green enough for farming and ranching despite the Idaho Territory's harsh climate. Nathan took Sarah straight to the boarding house, run by a stern-faced woman named Mrs. Patterson who looked Sarah up and down with a skeptical eye. "She got money. I will cover her room for a week," Nathan said, producing coins from his pocket. "And meals too, Mrs." Patterson's expression softened slightly. "Fine, but I run a respectable establishment, no trouble." "There will not be any trouble," Nathan assured her. Once Sarah was settled in a small but clean room upstairs, Nathan tipped his hat to her. "Stage comes through in 4 days. You can ask about passage to wherever you want to go. Mrs. Patterson's not warm, but she is honest. You will be safe here." Sarah realized with a sudden pang that he was saying goodbye. "You are leaving." "Got to get back to work," Nathan said. "Ranch I work for is about 20 miles north of here. Been gone longer than I should have already." Sarah wanted to ask him to stay, wanted to tell him that she was not ready to be alone again, but she had no right to ask anything more of him. He had already saved her life. "Thank you," she said, and the words felt desperately inadequate. "For everything. I do not know what I would have done if you had not found me." Nathan's expression was unreadable. "You would have figured something out. You are tougher than you think." He started to turn away, then paused. "If you need anything before you leave town, tell Mrs. Patterson to send word to the Granger Ranch. That is where I will be." Then he was gone, his boots echoing on the stairs, and Sarah stood alone in her little room feeling like something important had just walked out of her life. The next 4 days passed in a strange blur. Sarah recovered her strength, eating regular meals and sleeping in a real bed for the first time in months. Mrs. Patterson was indeed stern, but she was not unkind, and she helped Sarah wash and mend her clothes. The other boarders were mostly men passing through, prospectors and cowboys and traveling salesmen who tipped their hats politely, but kept their distance. Sarah should have been planning her next move. She should have been figuring out how to get back east, how to make a new life without her parents. But instead, she found herself thinking about Nathan Garrison, the quiet steadiness of him, The way he had looked at her parents' graves with real respect. The kindness in his voice when he said, "You are not alone." She barely knew him. He was just a cowboy who had done a good deed, but something about those days on the trail had imprinted themselves on her heart in a way she could not shake. The feeling of safety when he sat watch by the fire. The gentle way he had helped her onto his horse. The fact that he had asked for nothing in return, had simply helped because it was the right thing to do. On the third day, Mrs. Patterson looked at her over breakfast and said, "You are thinking about that cowboy." Sarah's face flamed. "I do not know what you mean." "Sure you do not," Mrs. Patterson said dryly. "Nathan Garrison's a good man, works hard, does not drink too much, does not cause trouble, keeps to himself mostly, but he is solid, could do worse." "I am not trying to do anything," Sarah protested. "I am going back east on the stage." Mrs. Patterson shrugged. "Suit yourself. But there is not much back east for a woman with no family and no prospects. Out here, at least, people do not ask too many questions about where you came from. They care more about what you can do." Sarah thought about that conversation for the rest of the day. What could she do? She could work a loom, but there were no textile mills out here. She could read and write and cipher, but those skills did not seem particularly valuable in a territory where survival depended on hardier talents. She could cook a little, sew a little, but nothing that would support her on her own. That night, she lay in bed and admitted the truth to herself. She did not want to go back east. There was nothing there for her now. Her parents had died chasing a dream of something better, and Sarah found that she wanted to honor that dream. She wanted to stay in this hard, beautiful country and make something of herself. And if she was being completely honest, she wanted to see Nathan Garrison again. The stage arrived on schedule the next morning, a dusty coach pulled by 6 horses and driven by a grizzled man who looked like he had been doing this job since before Sarah was born. Mrs. Patterson looked at Sarah expectantly. "You getting on?" Sarah shook her head. "No. I think I am going to stay." Mrs. Patterson's lips twitched in what might have been a smile. "Thought you might. You can work for me if you want. Help with cooking and cleaning. I cannot pay much, but room and board would be covered." It was not the life Sarah had imagined, but it was a start. "Thank you, I accept." "Good," Mrs. Patterson said briskly. "You can start today, and if you want to walk out to the Granger Ranch on your day off, I will draw you a map, but do not say I told you to go." Sarah felt her face heat again, but she nodded. "I understand." She worked for Mrs. Patterson for 2 weeks before she gathered the courage to make the walk to the Granger Ranch. It was a beautiful late September day, the air crisp and clear, the mountains sharp against a brilliant blue sky. The ranch sat in a valley where grass grew thick and cattle grazed across rolling hills. Sarah had never seen so much open space, so much land stretching away to the horizon. The ranch house was a long, low building made of logs, with smoke rising from a stone chimney. Several outbuildings surrounded it, barns and stables and bunkhouses. Men moved around doing various jobs, but Sarah's eyes found Nathan immediately. He was in a corral working with a young horse, his movements patient and sure as he gentled the animal to accept a saddle. Sarah stood at the fence watching, not wanting to interrupt. Nathan worked for nearly 20 minutes before he glanced up and saw her. Surprise flickered across his face, followed by something else. Pleasure, maybe. He said something to another cowboy who took over with the horse, then walked over to where Sarah stood. "Sarah," he said, and she loved the way her name sounded in his rough voice. "Did not expect to see you. Thought you would be halfway to California by now." "I decided to stay," Sarah said. "Mrs. Patterson gave me a job, and I wanted to thank you again for what you did. It did not feel finished before when you left." Nathan leaned against the fence, his gray eyes studying her face. "You do not owe me thanks. Anyone would have done the same." No, Sarah said firmly. They would not have. You saved my life, Nathan. That means something. He looked uncomfortable with her gratitude, shifting his weight from one foot to the other. You settling in all right at the boarding house? I am, Sarah said. It is good work, honest work, and Mrs. Patterson is kinder than she seems. She hesitated, then plunged ahead before she lost her nerve. I was hoping maybe I could see you sometimes. If you come to town. I do not know many people here, and you are the only one who knows what happened to me, the only one who understands. Something softened in Nathan's expression. I come to town most Saturday nights. Usually just for supplies, maybe a drink at the saloon, but I could stop by the boarding house instead if you want. I would like that, Sarah said, and felt her heart lift with hope. Nathan did come by that Saturday, and the Saturday after that, and the one after that. At first they sat in Mrs. Patterson's parlor making awkward conversation while the landlady pretended not to listen from the kitchen. But gradually, they grew more comfortable with each other. Nathan told Sarah about growing up in Texas, about learning to ride and rope before he could properly read, about losing his parents and heading north looking for work, about the ranches he had worked, the cattle drives he had been on, the vast loneliness of this country that could swallow a man whole if he was not careful. Sarah told him about Philadelphia, about the crowded streets and the textile mill, about her parents' decision to go west, about her fear and grief after they died, and the strange twist of fate that had left her here in Idaho Territory instead of Oregon, about how she was starting to think maybe this was where she was supposed to be all along. By October, they were taking walks together through the town and up into the foothills where the aspens turned gold and the air smelled like autumn. Nathan showed Sarah how to identify animal tracks, how to read the weather in the clouds, how to move quietly through the woods without startling the deer. Sarah found herself watching his hands as he pointed out different plants and landmarks, noticing the lean strength of his body, the way he moved with such natural grace. She was falling in love with him. She knew it with a certainty that should have frightened her, but instead felt like coming home. One evening in late October, they sat on a hillside overlooking the valley as the sun set in a blaze of orange and red. The ranch land spread below them, peaceful and beautiful in the fading light. Nathan had been quieter than usual all afternoon, and Sarah wondered if something was troubling him. I have been thinking, he said finally, his voice low, about how I found you out there on the prairie, about how close you came to dying, and I have been thinking about how different everything is now that you are here. Sarah's heart began to beat faster. Different how? Nathan turned to look at her, and the expression in his gray eyes made her breath catch. I have been alone a long time, Sarah. Got used to it, figured that is just how my life was going to be. Then I found you, and suddenly being alone does not seem right anymore. These past few weeks, seeing you on Saturdays, talking to you, being near you, it is the best part of my week. The best part of my life, if I am being honest. Nathan, Sarah whispered, but he was not finished. I know I do not have much to offer, he continued. I am just a cowboy who works for wages. Got a little money saved, but nothing impressive. And I know you probably have plans, maybe want to go somewhere else eventually, meet someone better. But I need to tell you how I feel, because if I do not say it now, I might lose my nerve. He reached out and took her hand, his calloused fingers gentle around hers. I love you, Sarah. I think I started loving you that first day when you stood there so brave and scared at the same time, and every day since, I have loved you more. Tears spilled down Sarah's cheeks, but they were happy tears. I love you too, she said, her voice shaking with emotion. I have been so afraid to hope that you might feel the same way. You are the strongest, kindest, best man I have ever known. When I am with you, I feel safe. I feel like I am exactly where I am supposed to be. Nathan cupped her face in his hands and kissed her, soft and gentle at first, then deeper as she responded. Sarah had never been kissed before, but it felt natural and right, like something she had been waiting for her whole life without knowing it. When they finally pulled apart, both of them were breathless. "Marry me," Nathan said urgently. "I know it is fast. I know we have not known each other long, but I do not care. I want to spend every day of my life with you. I want to build something real and lasting. Say yes, Sarah. Please say yes." "Yes," Sarah said, laughing and crying at the same time. "Yes, of course, yes." They were married 3 weeks later in a simple ceremony at the small church in Malad City. Mrs. Patterson stood up as Sarah's witness, and Tom Granger, Nathan's boss, stood up for him. Sarah wore a new dress that Mrs. Patterson had helped her make from blue calico, and Nathan wore his best clothes, his hair freshly cut and his boots polished to a shine. The preacher was an itinerant minister who came through once a month, a kind old man who seemed pleased to be performing a wedding instead of a funeral for once. When Nathan slipped a simple gold band on Sarah's finger and promised to love and cherish her for the rest of his days, Sarah felt her parents' presence like a blessing. They had wanted a better life for her, and here it was. Not the Oregon farm they had dreamed of, but something just as good. Something better, maybe, because it was hers and Nathan's together. Tom Granger surprised them by offering Nathan a small cabin on the ranch property. "Been vacant for a year," he said gruffly. "Needs work, but it is yours if you want it. About time you had a real home, Garrison." The cabin was indeed rough, just 2 rooms and a fireplace, but Sarah had never been happier. She scrubbed the floors and windows until they shone, made curtains from fabric bought at the general store, arranged their few possessions until the space felt cozy and welcoming. Nathan built her a better stove for cooking and added shelves for her books, the few she had managed to keep from the Wagon train. He worked long days at the ranch, but every evening he came home to her, and that was all Sarah needed. That first winter was hard. Snow piled high around the cabin, and there were days when they could not leave at all. But they had laid in supplies, and Nathan knew how to survive harsh conditions. They spent long evenings by the fire, talking and reading aloud and making love in the warmth of their bed while wind howled outside. Sarah learned to cook venison and elk, to make bread that rose properly, to mend clothing so it would last another season. Nathan taught her to shoot a rifle, insisting she needed to know how to defend herself when he was not there. "This country can be dangerous," he said seriously. "I need to know you can take care of yourself if something happens." Sarah practiced until she could hit a target more often than not. She never enjoyed it, but she understood the necessity. Out here, self-reliance was not optional. Spring came slowly, the snow reluctant to melt, but when it finally did, the valley burst into color. Wildflowers carpeted the meadows and the streams ran high with snowmelt. Sarah planted a garden near the cabin, coaxing vegetables from the rocky soil. She made friends with the other ranch wives, women who had also come west for various reasons and understood the challenges of frontier life. They taught her to preserve food for winter, to make soap and candles, to do 100 practical things she had never needed to know in Philadelphia. By summer, Sarah felt like she had lived in Idaho territory her whole life. The memories of her old existence had faded like an old photograph, less real than the daily work of maintaining a home and supporting her husband. She was tanned from hours in the sun, stronger from physical labor, more confident in her abilities. When she looked in the mirror, she barely recognized the pale factory girl she had been. Nathan watched her bloom with pride and love. He worked hard to save money, talking about eventually buying their own land, running their own cattle. It would take years, but they were young and time was on their side. In the meantime, they were happy with what they had. In October, exactly a year after Nathan's proposal on the hillside, Sarah told him she was pregnant. His joy was so complete and overwhelming that he swept her into his arms and spun her around despite her laughing protests. "We are going to have a baby," he kept saying, like he could not quite believe it. "Sarah, we are going to be parents." "I know," she said, laughing and crying at the same time. "I know, my love. The pregnancy was not easy." Sarah was sick for months, could barely keep food down, and worried constantly that something would go wrong. But Nathan was endlessly patient and supportive, rubbing her back when she was ill, bringing her tea and dry toast, sitting with her through the long nights when she could not sleep. The ranch women checked on her regularly, offering advice and reassurance. Their son was born in late May of 1874, on a warm spring morning when light flooded through the cabin windows. The birth was long and painful, but when Sarah finally held her baby in her arms, every moment of suffering was forgotten. He was perfect, red-faced and squalling, with a shock of dark hair and his father's gray eyes. "Samuel," Sarah said softly, touching her son's tiny hand. "Samuel Nathan Garrison." Nathan knelt beside the bed, his eyes wet with tears as he looked at his wife and son. "He is beautiful. You are beautiful. Thank you, Sarah. Thank you for this." Samuel grew quickly, a healthy baby who thrived despite the rustic conditions. Sarah devoted herself to motherhood with the same determination she had brought to everything else in her new life. She nursed her son, rocked him when he cried, sang him lullabies her own mother had sung to her. Nathan was a devoted father, coming home from work to hold his son and talk to him as if he could understand every word. 2 years later, their daughter was born. They named her Eliza Grace, and she had Sarah's dark hair and Nathan's steady temperament. Now their little cabin felt truly like a home, filled with the sounds of children playing and laughing. In 1876, Nathan's dream finally came true. Tom Granger was getting older and decided to sell off some of his land to his most trusted workers. Nathan bought 160 acres in the northern section of the valley, with a stream running through it and good grazing land for cattle. He and Sarah built a new house there, bigger than the cabin, with separate bedrooms for the children and a real kitchen for Sarah. It was not grand by anyone's standards, but it was theirs. Their own land, their own home, their own future. Nathan ran cattle and broke horses, while Sarah kept the house and garden and raised the children. They were not rich, but they had enough. More importantly, they had each other. On summer evenings, they would sit on the porch and watch the sun set over their land. Samuel and Eliza played in the yard, chasing each other and laughing in the long twilight. Nathan would take Sarah's hand and she would lean against his shoulder, and they would marvel at the life they had built together. "Do you ever think about that day I found you?" Nathan asked one such evening. "Out there on the prairie." "Every day," Sarah said honestly. "I think about how close I came to dying, how I had given up hope, and then you came riding over the hill and said I was not alone." She turned to look at him, this man she loved more than life itself. "You saved me in every way a person can be saved. You gave me a reason to keep living, and then you gave me a life worth living." Nathan kissed her temple. "You saved me too. I just did not know I needed saving until I met you. I was so alone before, Sarah. I did not even realize how empty my life was. You filled all those empty places." Sarah thought about the wagon train that had left her behind, assuming she was dead. At the time, it had seemed like the worst thing that could possibly happen. But if they had not left her, she never would have met Nathan. She would have gone to Oregon with her parents, and they probably would have died anyway from cholera or accident or any of the 100 ways people died on the frontier. And she would have ended up alone regardless, but without Nathan to anchor her, without this life they had built. Everything had worked out exactly as it was supposed to. The tragedy and loss had led to something beautiful. In 1880, they had another child, a second son they named Joseph. By then, Samuel was 6 and Eliza was 4, both of them delighted with their new baby brother. The ranch was prospering, and Nathan had hired 2 hands to help with the work. They were expanding slowly but surely, buying more land when they could afford it, building up their herd. Sarah had become one of the pillars of the small community that had grown up around Malad City. She organized church socials, helped new families get settled, and was known for her kindness and generosity. Women came to her for advice, knowing she would listen without judgment and offer practical help. She never forgot what it felt like to be desperate and alone, and she made sure no one in their community ever felt that way if she could help it. The years passed, marked by the rhythms of ranch life. Calving season in spring, branding and roundup in summer, harvest in autumn, quiet winter months when the family drew close around the fire. Samuel grew tall and strong, learning to ride and rope and work cattle alongside his father. Eliza was bright and curious, always asking questions and reading every book she could get her hands on. Joseph was the baby for several years until twin girls arrived in 1885, named Clara and Rose. Nathan built additions onto the house to accommodate their growing family. 5 children meant endless work, endless noise, endless love. Sarah was busy from dawn to dusk, but she had never been happier. This was the life she was meant to live, the family she was meant to have. In the summer of 1890, Samuel turned 16 and announced he wanted to go to boys for schooling. He had dreams of becoming a lawyer, of using his mind instead of his hands. Nathan was disappointed at first, having hoped his eldest son would take over the ranch someday, but Sarah understood Samuel's restlessness. He had inherited her love of learning, and he needed to chase his own dreams just as she and Nathan had chased theirs. "Let him go," she told Nathan one night. "We cannot hold our children back just because we want them near. He needs to find his own way." Nathan sighed but agreed. They used some of their savings to send Samuel to school, proud and heartbroken in equal measure. But Eliza showed real talent with horses, and announced she intended to stay on the ranch and breed them properly, which pleased Nathan immensely. Joseph, still only 10, had not yet decided what he wanted, but he loved the land as much as his father did. The twins were too young to know anything except that they loved their family and their home. Sarah was 43 years old in 1895, looking back on 23 years of marriage with gratitude and joy. She had gray threads in her dark hair now, lines around her eyes from years of sun and laughter. Nathan was 48, his own dark hair going silver at the temples, his body still strong from a lifetime of hard work. They had built something remarkable together. The ranch now covered over 500 acres and supported a sizable herd. The house was comfortable and well-maintained, the barn and outbuildings solid and functional. Samuel had indeed become a lawyer and was practicing in boys, making his parents proud. Eliza, at 21, was making a name for herself breeding quality horses. Joseph was working the ranch alongside his father, proving himself capable and dedicated. The twins, at 10 years old, were in school in Malad City, bright girls with their whole futures ahead of them. On a warm October evening in 1895, Sarah and Nathan took a walk up to the hillside where he had proposed all those years ago. They still did this sometimes, when they wanted to remember where they had started. The valley spread below them, golden in the autumn light, and their house sat solid and real among the fields they had worked and the fences they had built. 23 years, Nathan said, his arm around Sarah's waist. "Sometimes it feels like yesterday. Sometimes it feels like forever." "Both," Sarah agreed. "It feels like both." She leaned her head on his shoulder. "Do you remember what you said to me that first day when you found me on the prairie?" "You are not alone," Nathan quoted softly. "I have never been alone since," Sarah said. "Not for one single day." "You kept that promise, Nathan. Every day of our marriage you have made sure I know I am not alone, that I am loved and valued and cherished." "Same for me," Nathan said. "You gave me a family, Sarah. A home. A reason to wake up every morning grateful to be alive. I had no idea life could be this good." They stood in comfortable silence as the sun sank lower, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink and purple. Down below, they could see lights beginning to glow in their house windows. Their children were there. Their grandchildren would come someday. A whole future stretching ahead built on the foundation of love and hard work and commitment. Sarah thought about the girl she had been at 20, standing lost and alone on the empty prairie. If she could go back and tell that terrified young woman what was coming, she would hardly believe it. So much pain had led to so much joy. So much loss had led to so much love. "Thank you," she said to Nathan, "not for the first time and not for the last. For finding me. For choosing me. For loving me." Nathan kissed her, slow and sweet, the kiss of two people who had weathered storms together and come through stronger. "Thank you for saying yes. For taking a chance on a cowboy with nothing but hope to offer. You made all my dreams come true, Sarah Garrison." As they walked back down the hillside hand in hand toward their home and their family, Sarah felt complete peace. The wagon train had left her behind all those years ago, thinking she was already dead. But she had never been more alive than she was now, had never been more herself than in this life she and Nathan had built together in the wild heart of Idaho territory. Their story had started with abandonment and ended with belonging. And it was far from over. There were still years ahead, still grandchildren to meet, still seasons to weather and celebrate. But whatever came next, they would face it together. Because that was what they had promised each other on that October day in 1872, when a lonely cowboy found a desperate woman and said the three words that changed both their lives forever: "You are not alone." And Sarah never was again.